Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. When I posted my video of Catweasel last weekend, which seems to have gone down quite well, thank you very much to everybody who's watched it, I did mention that I was going to do two videos which were a bit more feel-good than the usual fare that I present on this channel, which tends to be, as I said, end-of-the-world things, post-apocalyptic things, horror, sci-fi, quite dark-themed shows from the past and shows that are around now. I like to do some of the best of the modern shows at the moment, and I would recommend that you go and take a look at yesterday's video, which was Paradise and Born Again, two new shows currently running on Disney+. Highly recommended both of those shows, so check out my video, which went up yesterday, where I talk a little bit, without spoilers, about these two great shows. But generally, the channel is full of classic horror, classic sci-fi, and a lot of it is quite dark, disturbing perhaps, and a lot of it has evoked memories in you of things that you'd forgotten over the years, which is, as I keep saying, is part of the remit of this channel. But as I said, when I did Catweasel, I said I was going to do two videos that were a bit more upbeat and a bit more sunny. And the one I'm doing today is the second of those shows. Today I'm going to take you back to 1971. I'm going to invite you to get on board with the Double Deckers. Hello, my name is Paul Mount. Welcome to my world of stuff. If you are new here, why not like and subscribe to the channel? It's completely free. A subscription costs nothing. Nada, zilch, no pence. So if you are new, if you've been attracted by this retro video, and I know a lot of people are, click the subscribe button, because there's loads of this sort of stuff in the back half of the channel, and there's a lot more to come in months and years to come, hopefully, all being well, if we don't get blown up in the meantime. Very much a retro themed channel, so if you like your old TV and your old films, you'll find lots of stuff to interest you here. So just press that subscribe button, like, thumbs up, all that sort of stuff is very good for the algorithm, apparently, this mysterious algorithm. And leave a comment, it's always nice to have comments. Right, yeah, go back to 1971. This is a series called Here Come the Double Deckers, often referred to in a sort of lazy shorthand as The Double Deckers, but the full title is Here Come the Double Deckers. 17 episode, full colour, music and dancing, colourful, slapstick knockabout comedy series for young kids. This debuted in the UK on the 1st of January 1970, although it debuted on American TV in September the previous year. To talk about the Double Deckers, I need to first of all explain how we got to the Double Deckers and how the series arrived. And it has its roots in an organisation called the Children's Film Foundation, which some of you may have vague, distant memories of. This was an organisation that was set up in the 1950s, a non-profit organisation that made films for kids that were shown on Saturday morning cinema presentations. Back in the day, kids would go out on Saturdays, they'd be taken to the local cinema, they would watch films and shows specially made or specially aimed at them. They weren't specifically made for the Saturday morning market, but they were films that were appropriate for kids, and the Children's Film Foundation was set up because there was an investigation into the sort of material that was being shown at the cinema shows, and it was decided there was a bit too much Americana, a bit too much American influence. So the CFF was set up with a levy taken from ticket sales generally across the cinema to give the Children's Film Foundation a budget to make British-themed films reflecting British culture and British youth. Their budgets were very low, but they churned out a lot of product over the years. And the Children's Film Foundation reigned supreme for decades, really. Kids would go out on Saturday mornings, give their parents a couple of hours of blessed relief so they could do other things. And the kids would have a wild old time watching old films and cartoons. And eventually the Children's Film Foundation was generating new content. Short films, usually running for about 55 minutes to an hour, and sometimes series of short film-type adventure series for kids. In 1968, a series called The Magnificent Six and a Half debuted on the Children's Film Foundation roster. It was a six-part series of half-hour episodes, which depicted the rambunctious adventures of a bunch of lively London kids who got involved in all sorts of slapstick yarns that entertained kids for half an hour. 3 series of this were made across a period 1968, 69, and interestingly 1972. Looking at The Magnificent Six and a Half, I think there's some of it on YouTube. I looked at one quite recently. it's very much an embryonic version of the double-deckers. And as we see, it very much is, because the same people went on to do the double-deckers. But if you watch a bit of the Magnificent Six and a Half, the format is much the same. A bunch of young kids having knockabout adventures, slapstick. It's just very much broad comedy that kids laugh at, or certainly did back in those days. There were 6 episodes in the first series, and interesting, if you look at the cast of the first series of the Magnificent Six and a Half, the cast included, particularly interesting, the lead character Steve was played by an actor called Len Jones. If that name rings a bell with you at all, it's because he, around this time, was providing the voice of Joe 90 on one of Jerry and Sylvia Anderson's less regarded shows. And also in the cast were 2 actors, Michael Aldrison and Brinsley Ford. Notable for several reasons, because 2 of them, as we'll discover, went on to star in the Double-Deckers. And Brinsley Ford, of course, was a young black boy. And this was unusual at the time to have that sort of representation on any sort of film or TV in the UK. It was very much white face everywhere. So it was quite interesting and progressive, I suppose, to cast a young black lad. The Magnificent Six and a Half was very popular. It ran to a second series in 1969. Again, 6 episodes, the same sort of format, slightly different cast. Len Jones was unavailable, and the character of Steve was retained, but recast by an actor called Robin Davis, a name you will remember, hopefully, from last week's Catweasel video, where he played Carrot in the first series of Catweasel. I love the way all my videos sort of interlink eventually in some sort of strange way. I suppose, covering so much material, there are bound to be crossovers and connections and things, and I quite like that sort of thing, that sort of continuity. So after the second series, there was a strange gap before the third series, and the creators of the Magnificent Six and a Half, Harry Booth and Roy Simpson, they reconfigured the series and tried to sell the format as a children's series for British television. They tried to sell it to the BBC, who weren't interested, but eventually they got it produced by 20th Century Fox Television and an independent British television company called Century Films. Nothing to do with Jerry Anderson's Century 21, of course. The show then, ironically, considering the BBC turned it down, it made its way onto the BBC, where it arrived, as I said, at the beginning of 1971. What's the Double-Decker all about then? Well, it's not rocket science, it's a very simplistic story, and I think part of it, the appeal of it, certainly at the time, I think, was that wish fulfillment thing of kids being able to do whatever they like without adults wagging a disapproving finger, without teachers forcing them to go to school. These kids were just out and about. They weren't vandals, they weren't hooligans, they were just young, good-natured kids having fun. They had their headquarters on an abandoned London double-decker bus, a very old-fashioned double-decker bus, that was based in this old scrapyard, a bit like Totter's Yard from Doctor Who, I think, which is this wooden yard. They entered through a very complicated series of pulleys that opened the doorway. They could get into the yard. Then they had a special combination lock on the double-decker bus. They were a very security-conscious bunch, the double-deckers. And they would gather every week and have their adventures. They were very much the stuff of slapstick, custard pies and pratfalls and sound effects of people go boing, all that sort of stuff. It was a nice mix of kids, and I think for kids of that age, and I was of that age at the time, you sort of wanted to be part of that gang. And although I'm always sceptical of sort of identification figures on film and TV, I can say from experience that I sort of identified with these characters, and you wanted to be part of them because they were having such a good time. There was no authority in their lives. The only authority figure was a character called Albert, who was a street sweeper, played by Melvin Hayes, who of course went on to things like It Ain't Half Hot Man. He was involved in the writing. I think he wrote 1 episode, and the series was interesting in that it wasn't just slapstick and knockabout stuff. It was a musical as well. There would often be musical moments throughout the stories, which on the face of it wouldn't really appeal to me, being sort of more into the drama side of things. But I was sort of getting into pop music at the time, and there were some damn catchy songs in the Double-Deckers, and most episodes had a song and dance routine with the cast leaping about the sets and having a good time. And that's what Double-Deckers was all about, just having a good time for 22 minutes with these kids who were doing the things that we couldn't do because we were at home, we were in school, but these kids were out there having fun. They had their den, their headquarters, which lots of kids did. Lots of kids had tree houses and dens out in the forest and the woods and things back in the olden days. I don't think it happens quite so much now. There were 7 main members of the cast as far as the kids are concerned, and amongst them several quite well-known names. The leader of the group was Scooper, played by Peter Firth. Now, one of our senior actors and one of our best regarded actors. We don't see enough of Peter Firth. He had, or has had, a very long and illustrious career. He's probably best known for his role in the BBC, the long-running BBC espionage series Spooks, and its feature film spin-off Spooks the Greater Good, where he played Harry Pierce. He also appeared, and again, connections, he appeared as Dominic Hyde in the 2 BBC plays in the early 80s, one of which I've already reviewed further back on the channel. But he's had a rich and varied career. He's not somebody who's really a household name, probably one of those actors who never wanted to be a household name. He didn't want to be a star. He wanted to act and he wanted to work, and he's got a fearsome body of work, so he's a very well-known actor. The only other really well-known name, again, is I mentioned Brinsley Ford, who was drafted over from the Magnificent Six and a Half. Here, he plays Spring, just a young, lively black boy who is just full of fun and full of vigour. There's nothing made about the colour of his skin either, which is really nice. He's just one of the group, they accept him for who he is, and they just go and have a good time. He, of course, went on to huge acclaim as the lead singer with the reggae group Aswad, who had a number of hits back in the 80s into the 90s, particularly the number one hit, Don't Turn Around, which got to number one in 1988. Brinsley is still around today, working tirelessly, and in fact his work for the arts was recognised when he was given an MBE in 2015. The rest of the cast included Michael Alderson, who, as I mentioned, was part of the cast of The Magnificent Six and a Half. He played Brains, the sort of boffin of the group, who was always coming up with wacky inventions and devices that got the gang into all sorts of trouble. We had Gillian Bailey, who played Billy. She was an actress who went on to have a bit of a career after the Double Deckers. You may remember, I think I referred to her in my Blake 7 Blu-ray review. She appeared as Ravella, one of the rebels in the first episode who lures Blake out of the Dome City and ultimately to her death. She had a career for a few years afterwards, but eventually gave it up and went into academia. She went on to become the head of drama department at the Royal Holloway University of London College, and as of July 2023, I believe, she's the Professor of Women's Performance Histories at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London. So she went on to have an interesting and varied career. So as the rest of the cast are concerned, we had Bruce Clark. Bruce Clark was an young American boy. He played Styx, who was a drummer. He was brought on board because Fox, who financed and commissioned the show, they wanted it to have a transatlantic feel. They wanted it to feel as American as it was British. So although it was set in London, Styx was brought on board as an American face for American viewers. And interestingly, there's lots of references in the show to candy rather than chocolate. And I think there's one episode where the gang is celebrating Thanksgiving. So it is very much that balancing a London double-decker bus and kids having adventures on it and making it relatable to an American audience. Bruce Clark didn't have a career, I don't think, really after the double-deckers. He went back to America. Sure, he did a few other things, but he left show business not long afterwards, I think. Also on the cast we had Douglas Simmons. He played Donut. He was the big hefty lad. You could have fat lads in shows in those days. You can't do it these days. But he was a big fat boy who liked to eat cakes. Who could want more? He was sort of a bumbling comic relief character in a show that was already comedic. It was his only real notable acting role. I think he had a very small part in an edition of the BBC's long-running play To Today, around about the same time as the Double Deckers. But I don't think he acted again. And he left the profession after the Double Deckers, went on to work in science and medicine. He became a theoretical physicist. He worked in medical computing and finally retired because he had a love of gardening. And unfortunately, Douglas passed away of a heart attack in March 2011. The final member of the team was Debbie Russ, playing Tiger, the 8-year-old young girl who travelled around with the older kids and always wanted to keep up, always wanted to be part of the fun and the action. She went on to appear in shows like The Adventurer and The Protectors for ITC before moving into broadcasting, and she's even now, today, she still broadcasts regularly for the BBC World Service and BBC Radio 4 Extra. She was accompanied by her pet stuffed toy Tiger, who was dragged along with her in all the Double Deckers adventures. And as an interesting sort of side note, after the Double Deckers had finished, Debbie Russ reappeared as Tiger, as Debbie Russ, in a film called Go for a Take from 1972. This starred Reg Varney of On the Buses fame. He played an ageing stuntman in this film, which was filmed in and around Elstree Studio. And in one particular scene, he's resting up next to an abandoned double-decker bus. I don't think it's the bus from the Double Deckers TV series. It doesn't look exactly the same. But as he's resting up there, Debbie Russ comes along as Tiger with a stuffed tiger. Not the one from the TV series, because that had gone missing since the series ended. So they had to hurriedly find a new tiger pet. And she explained to him that she was making a series called The Double Deckers, and she mentioned a character called Brains. And that was an interesting offshoot of The Double Deckers. in that one of the cast appeared in character in another production the year after the show finished. The show itself then, I mean, I'm looking here at a list of the episodes because I've not seen them for years. Some of them I'm quite familiar with, some of them are blanks, really, as far as I'm concerned. But from memory and looking at the story outlines, they are very much the stuff of children's film foundation fiction. Wacky adventure stories, a lot of slapstick, a lot of fun. Episodes like Tiger Takes Off, which was the very first episode, in which Tiger accidentally goes off for a trip on a hovercraft created by Brains. This was, in fact, I think, a remake of a Magnificent Six and a Half episode. The Case of the Missing Donut, where Donut eats an invisibility formula that Brains invented. In fact, several of the episodes sort of worked around Brains' creations and inventions. There was an episode called Robbie the Robot, not the one from Forbidden Planet, where he invented a robot which sort of went on a rampage. In an episode called The Helping Hound, the gang band together to help an old lady redecorate her house because she's in danger of being evicted by her nasty landlord. United We Stand, the owner of the yard that the gang used, he wants to turn it into a car park, and they sabotage his planning meeting with the mayor. And get a movie on, the gang enter a film contest. Brains has to edit the footage together. There was Happy Haunting, the inevitable haunted house episode. Invaders from Space, where two men in futuristic space costumes are wandering around London and the double-deckers think it's an alien invasion, but it's actually a publicity campaign for a new type of suite. The Go-Karters, it basically is a sort of a slightly farcical courtroom drama where Spring is on trial for a disorder of driving this go-kart around the streets of London, which is out of control. And it takes place then as a sort of a flashback to this go-kart race. And it features a virtually non-speaking appearance from the legendary Robin Asquith. So that's the style of the series. There's a couple of slightly weird episodes. There's one called Scooper Strikes Out, where Scooper, Peter Firth's character, is knocked out during a baseball match and enters a sort of a dreamscape where he's in a sort of a Alice in Wonderland type story. And this features a guest appearance, in fact, by a very young Jane Seymour, who went on to huge acclaim in James Bond films and so on. I think she was 19 at the time, and she plays Alice. The musical episodes then, there's lots of music, as I said, threaded throughout the story. There's really catchy sort of little pop songs. There's a really nice episode called Summer Camp, where they go on holiday. I mean, there's no parental figures in this at all. These kids do what they like. We don't see their home lives. We don't see their parents. None of that is of concern to us here. None of that's of concern to the double-deckers. They go off on holiday with Albert, with a sort of gypsy caravan, and they're dancing and singing throughout the countryside. And the songs are just so charming throughout the whole series. We also had great songs like It's a Day and a Half, Good Day at Yellow Rock, which had a sort of cowboy theme to it, with A Little Bit of Love, which comes from episode 7, which is a sort of mellow, romantic sort of ballad. Get On Board, of course, the classic title song, co-written by Melvin Hayes. Life is a Wonderful Thing, Granny's Rocking Chair, One Man Band, Welcome to the Party, which comes from that Alice in Wonderland episode, and Fat Ladies, which came from the very last episode. The reason I know these songs quite well, I had to look up the titles. I will explain a bit later on. But these are all just good fun, silly, short pop songs that fitted the narratives of the stories. A couple of the stories involve them being involved with showbizy things. In one episode, they come across a one-man band who's fallen hard times. He's called Barney, and they help him get back up on his feet and set up a gig which sets him on the path to fame and fortune. And in another episode, just called The Pop Singer, they meet up with Sydney, a musician who never really made it, and they try to reinvent him and create a new image, and he calls himself the Cool Cavalier. It's very much of its time, of course it is. It's very much of the early 1970s, that slightly post-60s ethos of colour and upbeat fun and happiness. And that's really what the Double Deckers was all about. It was just great fun. 17 episodes where you made some new friends and you spent some time with them on a Friday afternoon. For me, this is one of those shows, alongside Catweasel, that's is a flip side of the things that I'm normally interested in. Now, as you know, and as I've said again and again, I like my post-apocalypses. I like my end-of-the-world dramas. I find that fascinating. But as a kid, before I developed that taste, I liked stuff like this. And this was just colourful, exciting, and a bit like Catweasel, it evokes memories of long summer days. But oddly, like Catweasel, it was screened in the winter. So I suppose it was a bit of relief from the bleakness of those 1970s winters. And it was just a great, fun series. And I became very attached to it. And I became very fond of the entire cast. And I mentioned the wish fulfillment thing. And it's one of those shows that I think you identify with certain characters. And because Peter Firth was the young, handsome lad, I sort of identified with him a little bit. I wanted to be Scooper. In reality, I was more of a donut. Probably still am. But I identified with Peter Firth as this young, sort of, good-looking boy. And I will admit, Gillian Bailey as Billy was one of my first crushes, and I always saw Scooper and Billy as a couple, and as Scooper I sort of imagined Billy as being my girlfriend. I mean, it's all very juvenile and very innocent stuff, but I just like that this Billy was an older girl. She was probably 13 and Scooper was about that age, and they seemed a bit more mature than the rest of the gang, although they got involved in all the silliness as much as everybody else. It was a really good, fun series, and when it ended after 17 episodes, and I'll come back to that again in a moment, I wrote to the BBC, I wrote to the Radio Times, which was at the time the BBC's official organ of its broadcasting, covering TV and radio, and I was distressed that the show had ended, and I sent them a letter saying I was really upset the Double Deckers ended. When's it coming back? And they wrote me a letter saying that there were no plans for any more episodes, but they hoped there were lots of other shows on TV that I could enjoy. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. Bastard BBC. But that was the end of the Double Deckers, interestingly. 17 episodes were produced, and it's a bit like Mr. Ben, where there were half a dozen episodes or 13 episodes made. People often think, I think, with the Double Deckers, oh, it ran for years, there were loads of episodes, but no, there were just 17. There should have been more. The original plan was for 26 episodes, so when production ceased after the 17th, it was a sort of a hiatus, and they were due to go back and film another 9, and in fact there were plans for a second series of 26. But oddly enough, it seems that the show wasn't hugely popular, particularly in America. It was shown on Saturday mornings there, and apparently it didn't do incredibly well, wasn't incredibly popular. There was some merchandise, which I will talk about again in a moment, but the show didn't do incredibly well. I don't think it was very well received critically or with the audience. I think it didn't catch on in the way that people might have hoped it did. I think it probably did better in Britain. I think possibly in America it failed because it fell between two stools. It wasn't quite American enough, and it was a bit too British. Maybe, I think it's certainly true today, American audiences aren't hugely interested in anything that happens outside America. So I think that its British setting perhaps didn't appeal to American kids. But I know it did quite well over here, because I know at the time a lot of kids I knew and was in school with watched the Double Deckers and loved the Double Deckers, and it seemed to be a hit. So after 17 episodes, Fox pulled the plug, so there were no more Double Deckers episodes, which is a shame. Because as a fan of the show, I wanted more. I was enjoying it. It was great fun. I loved the music and the colour and the lightness of it. It was just great entertainment for a 12-year-old back in the 1970s. So the Double Deckers drifted into history. It did appear again, of course. It was repeated again and again on the BBC for several years. And I think in the 1980s, the rights moved over to ITV, who showed it for a while. It's not been seen on TV now for years, obviously. It is very much now an archive product. It was, however, released on DVD, which I have here. DVD released by Second Sight. I think it was released in 2010. I don't know if it's still available. I think you still get it on eBay and various secondary markets. I suppose it's a cherished DVD in my collection because it's a cherished part of my childhood. Equally cherished is an album which came out. I mentioned the songs, they were all collected, or many of them were collected, on an album that came out. And I can remember very clearly picking this record up in a store in Cardiff. And I can even remember paying £1.45 for it. My God, my memory. And I played this album to death. I, loved the songs, and I memorised them, and I visualised myself in this scenario. It's very sad. I wasn't a lonely child, but I had a vivid imagination with these things. And this album was a cherished possession. I played it to death. It is still a cherished possession. But do you think I can find it? I went looking for it before I filmed this video. I can't find it anywhere. I looked through my old vinyl. There's lots of old 12-inch singles that I had from my DJ days. Loads of old albums. Cannot find the Double Deckers album. But I know it's there somewhere, and I will find it one day. Other merchandise that came out, there was a paperback book, quite a slim paperback book. Again, I had that, and again, that's disappeared, which I think novelised several episodes. It was mainly a picture book with big print, so it was a very slim volume. And again, a bit of a cherished possession is my Double Deckers Annual from 1972, which I have held onto for all these years. And there, of course, is a very nice artwork image of the bus itself, and inside lots of tech stories and games and things. I don't think there's a comic strip, but yeah, it is in the style of those World Distributors Annals, which lots of tech stories and quizzes and things. And there were other things. There were colouring books. I think there was a lunchbox issued in America. But the main items of merchandise, I think, really were the annual and the book, and then much later on, the DVD collection. Yeah, I think very fondly of the Double Deckers, and you watch it now, and yes, of course, it's dated. Kids aren't like that these days. But it's one of the things I say about this channel, it's a nice way to reminisce about these old shows, and it brings back warm and happy memories. And I've watched a few episodes recently, and yeah, as I said, they're dated, they look their age, but they're still great fun, and they just remind you of watching it when I was a kid, and the feelings I had on Friday afternoon spending 25 minutes with these kids doing things I couldn't do. There was also a comic strip, incidentally, which ran in Whizzer and Chips for a year between May 1971 and May 1972. And I sort of vaguely remember the comic strip. I've been looking for examples of it. I can only find a few frames. And interestingly, it was reprinted a few years later in another comic called Cheeky, where it wasn't called the Double Deckers, it was called The Gang. I assume they kept the names of the characters because the connection from the series had gone. So it had this comic strip Afterlife. In terms of the Magnificent Six and a Half, where the original series sprang from, after the Double Deckers was cancelled, a third series of the Magnificent Six and a Half was made. This was made now by a completely different company, Lion Pacesetter, and it was directed by Peter Graham Scott, who went on to become an accomplished director of lots of children's and adult dramas later on in the 70s. A completely different cast was brought in. The character of Liz, who was one of the original group, she remained, played by a different actor, but the characters were all very much the same as the characters in the original Magnificent Six and a Half. So it's interesting to note that the series, the Double Deckers, here come the Double Deckers, sorry, span off from a film series that had an afterlife after the Double Deckers. It's quite unusual for that to happen. Children's Film Foundation itself, of course, by 1980, it ran out of steam a little bit. I think that Saturday morning, kids' TV, the likes of Multicoloured Swap Shop and Tiswas and so on, kept kids at home on Saturday morning. So I think that the need for them to rush off to the cinema to be entertained had diminished a little bit. And I think the Children's Film Foundation eventually morphed into something else. I think it still exists in a sense, but I don't think it's a production unit anymore. Because it was of its time, like the Double Deckers, it's of an era where the needs to entertain children were rather different than they are today. Kids today, of course, on their phones, on their iPads, they're on YouTube, hi kids, TikTok, all these things. Kids' entertainment has completely changed, which is why we should cherish the fact that it did exist. And if you were a fan of it at the time, if you've not seen it for years, and if, as I hope this video has reminded you of it, you find a way to access it, because there are some videos on YouTube, not very good quality, but you can find them on there. And I think if you saw the show at the time, it will be a massive nostalgia fix direct into your veins, because that's how a lot of these things are for me. Double Deckers. Right, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope it's brought back memories. That's the purpose of these things. If you've enjoyed the video and you're new here, or even if you're not new here, if you have watched the video and not subscribed, just a bit naughty, really. You should subscribe. It's a decent thing to do. It's very good for the channel. The channel is growing quite nicely, getting new subscribers now every day. And you're all very welcome here, but keep coming back. So to do that, like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. Any suggestions, incidentally, I'm getting some very nice suggestions for future content. Things I've not seen for years, things I've never seen, which I'm interested in looking at. So leave a suggestion down below, leave a comment down below. And don't forget to keep taking the stuff t-shirt. It is available. So there's a link down below in the description. If you fancy a new t-shirt for your collection, it's very nice. It's really comfortable, really comfortable. And there's also, if you're interested, a link down below for the iconic Get On Board theme tune for the Double Deckers, which I haven't put in the channel because of the copyright gods. They're very nasty. But it's the link down below, so if you want to remind yourself of the title sequence of the Double Deckers, where the gang are all sitting on the back of a bus, miming to the tune. And interestingly, I noticed that there are different backdrops in various episodes. So anyway, I'm rambling on a bit now. Right, thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking that stuff.